Cagney, thank you so much for being here to chat with our community. And before we get into all things branding, would you be willing to share a little bit more about yourself and how you got into the design world so our listeners can learn a little bit more about you?
Yeah, of course. So I actually started out as an illustration business because I was bored and a college student during COVID and just got an iPad to make some illustrations for some friends and family. And then they wanted to pay me for that. So that was nice. And I had started a little business from that. But I ultimately really just loved designing my own brand and website for that business. So I ended up like about a year or 2 in, fully pivoting to just become a brand and web designer, which was pretty bold because I, at the time, did not really know much about it. I was just like, "This is fun, so let me try doing this instead." And so I ended up working with other brand and web studios as a freelancer to just gain a bit more experience and learning a lot from them. And now I get to do that with your studio as well. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we freaking love you on the team. You're seeing people in some of like the best brands that we've ever designed. So I'm so excited to kind of dig into the actual science and things behind branding because I feel like it'll be really helpful for our audience. So let's just start with the basics. What really is branding? We've seen so many people taught this concept of branding as more than a logo, and we hear that like thrown out a lot to explain branding, but it doesn't necessarily like go over like what's the purpose of it? Like what is branding then? If it's not just a logo, like what is it?
Right. Yeah, I do feel like a lot of people focus so much on the logo, and that is just the tiniest piece of it. I always look as branding of really like curating an emotion and vibe. I mean, I'm all about like curating a vibe. I do it in my own home and like in your wardrobe and all those sort of things. So you do that with colors and fonts and your brand messaging and your marketing, your website copy, all of those together really make a brand. And think, for example, like no one's looking at the Nike logo alone and being swayed to just do it or something like that. Like they're looking and getting motivated by their powerful and inspiring ads. Even their like design perspective, their brand tagline, just do it. Like, yeah, it is in a bold font that matches their actual logo, but like an everyday person's not looking at that and really making that connection, but it's every single touch point that gets their message across and gets their emotion across. And so they do that with branding, not just their logo, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess when we bring that into the pet industry, like what do you believe sets a strong brand apart, specifically in the pet industry? There's so many like pet care provide, specifically pet care providers. There's so many of them in a lot of, cities and things like that. And a lot of them used to be able to differentiate themselves from places like Rover and Wag and things like that by just saying, "Hey, we're, a professional local pet care provider." But that's not really enough anymore. Like, so how do brands
Right.
set themselves apart from a branding perspective?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, every single brand, not even just the pet industry, you really have to think about what makes you different. And that can be very hard. I mean, even as brand and web designers, it can be hard for us to set apart from other studios. But even going back to like, say that Nike example, like Nike and Adidas, they both sell like athletic wear, but Adidas is more focused on like soccer players and stuff like that. And then Nike is more the everyday Joe who's going to go be sporty and athletic on the weekend. So as far as like pet industry, think about what makes you different. So maybe you have a background in working at a vet previously. So you have that sort of background. Maybe you're fear free certified. And then even one of our clients, she always provided like Polaroids of the pets after every visit. Like that made her different from other pet sitters. So it's more than just like you care for your clients' pets because well, we hope every single pet sitter is caring for their clients' pets. So really just think what's unique to you, what makes your specific service different, and knowing that we can then make you set apart as a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are interested in like this topic of, setting yourself apart, I highly recommend going back to episode 4 where I talked with Michelle all about like niching down. And there's so much room for that in the pet industry. Like I said, especially since there's so many of them. And the ability to kind of niche down and specialize can set you apart, not even visually from a branding perspective, but also like really speaking to people who resonate with like what you're offering, whether it's like, what if you're working with like just senior pets, that can
Right.
be incorporated right into your brand and your colors and your logo, but also just in your messaging and just everywhere throughout your business. And that really also ties into the concept of brand personality. So I was curious if you can kind of get into like how brand personality can really influence a pet business and how they're able to market.
Yeah, I always think of your brand as a person. So, like, if your brand was a person, what type of personality would you want? What type of personality would attract your ideal clients? Like, are they funny and outgoing and bold and playful, or are they more like serious and luxe and classy, all those sort of things? Because that will go into, like you mentioned, your brand messaging of how you're even speaking in your marketing. So are you using more like playful language, or are you using words that are more like, we have a refined pet service or premier pet care and all those sort of things? And it should feel in line with what your actual services are. So if your services aren't at that high ticket price, then there's no need to be doing some high ticket adjectives sort of deal. So I always think of it as a person, and again, that then helps me as a designer make the choices for, like, what colors and fonts and all the things we're gonna be choosing.
Yeah, it's funny that made me think of our brand questionnaire because we ask a lot of questions like that. Like if your brand was a person, like tell us about that person, or if your brand was a room, or like there's so many like
Right.
things that you can really make your brand like a living thing.
For sure, for sure. I think a lot of people sometimes get so caught up in trying to be different that they're just like, "I don't even know, like, what to do," which that's what we're here to help for.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. So let's talk about some specific brand elements, specifically colors and fonts. We can start with colors. So I was curious if you could expand a little bit on how color truly plays a role in branding and how color can reflect your brand values.
Yeah, for sure. So colors and fonts, honestly, they go hand in hand because, as I mentioned, like in that first question, it's all about curating an actual vibe. But colors have a lot of symbolism in them, even if we don't always, acknowledge it. I mean, I'm looking even on my computer screen of like red means exit out, or red means stop, yellow means in the middle or whatever, and green is go. Like our brain is just associated to categorize things, and so colors go in the same sort of way, even the type of hues or values of the color. So is it something that's more an intense green or a more like lighted, muted green? So some examples of this is even with their own clients on Timber and Co. They're a very outdoorsy area that's we're in the Pacific Northwest, I believe. And so her clients, they spend the weekends going on hikes with their dogs. Like she knows her clients very well. They love to do that. So we wanted to design a brand that attracts those type of people. So that's something that makes her different is she's attracting outdoorsy people. So we did a mix of colors that were very like earthy, but still bold and attracting the younger audience, and a mix of fonts that were also like bold and kind of had that node to, what would you say? Like it kind of just had an outdoorsy feel. And I think from everyday people, they may not notice that, but from a designer who's looking at fonts all day, I'm like, yeah, this font feels adventurous, or that it could be at like a national park or something. But then another example of Shady Spring Pet Retreat, they are like a paradise for your pets on 17 acres of land, which is what they like to say. And so we wanted the brand to feel very relaxing and welcoming and very serene. So we still had those sort of earthy colors since they are on a huge 17-acre property, but we made it more light and muted earthy colors that felt very relaxing on the eyes whenever you're on their website and looking at their branding. Then we did a mix of fonts that felt very elevated, but then also had a somewhat southern charm to them. So you can take those two, okay, we're using blues and greens to symbolize sort of similar things, but based off going one that's super bold and one that's more muted tells a totally different story.
It really does. And for those who are curious about those 2 brands, I'll also add this into the episode's, like, blog notes so you guys can see exactly what we're talking about with this, because those are really good examples of how effective it can be to really pair the colors, the fonts, like, all of it together, and it really just exudes what they're all about, right? Like, Timber& Co.
Right.
being very, like, adventure, hiking, outdoors, like, it feels that way, and it's very cohesive, and it's funny because 'cause you're right, like, I feel like it's something that people don't necessarily consciously know, but they feel like they know it when it doesn't work. Like,
Right.
if you're not a brand designer or even a designer, creative or anything, or you're not even, like, looking at that, like, you can tell when it's not working, but when it does, it just all fits together. Like, if you look at something, you're like, "Wow, I really wanna be a part of this," that
Mhm.
means you're an ideal client and it worked. Like, it you know?
Right. I think even like when us like Gen Z and millennial crowd, when we see like a new trendy restaurant, we're like, oh my gosh, I want to go there. And we're so influenced to go there because of their branding. Like the way that they design the interior, the way that they set up their menu, like all of that stuff is branding and attracting us. And so think of your pet business the same way.
That's true. I think of, like, even those, like, reels or I guess I'm not on TikTok. I know that's a I'm not on TikTok.
Same thing.
But same thing, but, like, the unboxing thing too, like, I feel like people like, it's, like, the whole experience of, like, what they're what's in their packaging, what does the box say, like, all
Right.
of that, like, really exudes so much, and it comes from, like, the colors and the fonts and just all of it working together.
Yeah, making it an entire experience. That's why it's so much more than just a tiny little logo. Because think if you had no colors and you're just all black and white and then just a logo with a paw, like, no one's gonna want to be enticed to go into that.
Yeah, exactly, especially these days when there's so many others out there, it's like, you really have to
Right.
be able to set yourself apart. So when it comes to the actual artwork in a brand, like in a logo, so, that main artwork, illustration, cartoon, mascot, all of that, I feel like you are really good at storytelling and symbolism and a lot of the brand creations. That's really honestly what stuck out to me when, we did our test day before we started working
Oh,
together. I love that you
thank
really
you.
did. Yeah, I love that you, like, did your research into, like, what makes this make sense. It's not just like, here's a dog or here's a cat. Like, you really brought
Right.
in meaning to it that rather than, like you said, kinda just slapping a black paw print in there and calling it a day. So can you walk us through the process of creating artwork that tells a story or even just, like, something that makes sense strategically for business? What's your process for making the logo mean something?
Yeah, so it honestly it kinda is different for every brand, but also the process is still somewhat the same. So as far as process goes, I'm always looking into what pieces can I pull from either their brand name, because some brand names will really let you do a little play on words with the logo or illustration. Also, some brands don't all need an illustration. I think that could be a whole conversation in and of itself. But then we have some that have like a tagline that I could really use, that I could make some sort of illustration and story behind it. So I think in order for me to be able to even do all that stuff is it really helps if the clients know their business and know their target audience very well. But there's no need to be very literal in the illustration like a paw print. I think a lot of people want to include a paw print and then they may have a business name that it's super obvious you already take care of pets. So there's no need to be like very literal unless your business name, you can't make that connection or anything. So, example, like I said, play on words. We did that for paws and claws. So having like in the paws be dog paws, but then with the claws part of the word, we made it be more like cat paws. So that was like a fun little illustration, but play on words. For Pups on the Coast, we did the P turning it into a palm tree since she is based in like a beachy area. Wakefield Pets, this was a fun one to do where their tagline was your partner in pet care. So making that dog nose, which actually happened to be his dog that had passed away. So making that dog nose into a subtle shape of a heart. And so that really ties into their actual tagline. But then you can also do subtle elements of pets if you really want to include it. But these still aren't paws. So the Healthy Hounds fitness one that we did, that one had like an H of a wagging tail because it's all about like a happy, healthy dog. And then Sit Stay Wait, they were a very like luxurious pet care brand. That one was a lot of fun to do. So we made the ampersand or like the and sign into the shape of a dog. But then she also cares for cats. So how could we include that? So we made the T's form into a subtle cat nose. Again, those are things that maybe people wouldn't immediately recognize, but they still tell a story in a subtle way without it being so super literal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times when you do, like, the examples that you were going through, like, it just really elevates the brand too. Like, if you just have, like, the name and then a paw print or just have, like, a dog or sometimes it does take away from, like, the meaning of it. Like, when you have
For
those
sure.
subtle incorporations, it just, like, makes it feel cohesive, like, it wraps all together, it just makes sense.
Yeah, and every single one is chosen strategically for that brand. Again, I'm sure from an outside perspective, you're like, "But how did you do that?" But, like, with the Sit, Stay, Wait, and even the Wakefield Pets, they both had a sort of luxe feel, so I'm not gonna do something that is cartoony, you know what I mean? Like, that just contrasts against what we're going for on our goal.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times we get clients coming to us who either have something, like, very specific that they want, or
Mhm.
they're very worried that by not having something obvious like a paw or a dog in there that, like, they're gonna mislead people or, like, something like that, but
Right.
there are so many ways, like you said, like, via the text, via subtle things that make sense. I mean, we still like Wakefield Pets. It's like if you like, it says Wake Pets in it, and we
Mhm.
have, that subtle incorporation, it kind of just ties it all together. So I hope that people listening to this can kind of let go of the feeling or, like, the pressure to, like, be like, you need to include all of the things. We've also had clients that, like, "Well, I work with more than dogs, so we need, like, every single species in the logo," and then you're worried about, scalability issues, or, you're
Right.
running into a lot of problems, and it almost detracts from the actual brand, right? Because now you're, like, getting too literal, you're kind of losing yourself by, like, feeling like you need to incorporate everything in your business into one, little piece, one
Right.
little graphic.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I just always use Nike as an example just because 'cause they're such a huge brand that everybody knows, but, like, you don't look at the Nike swoosh and then you're just thinking, "Yeah, okay, they sell athletic wear." Like, it and also your logo is always, always, always in the context of other things, so there's no need to include all of the types of pets that you serve because your logo is always going to be either like on the marketing materials with words that are talking about the services or on your website or on your Instagram. No one's just seeing the logo by itself and then trying to understand what you do for your services. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. That's a really good point, and that's kind of how where your logo is not just it's more important than just the logo for your entire brand that, like, really
Right.
brings it back in. And yeah, imagine if Nike, instead of having the swoosh, had, like, a shoe and shorts
Yeah.
and, like, everything, yeah, everything they offered into the logo, that'd be so, like, busy and all of that. So it's
Right.
really nice to be able to have, like, a symbol that represents what your brand is all about.
Right. In some ways, it can also, I feel like, limit you. If they only put like a shoe on their logo and then they expanded to do athletic wear, then they'd be like, oh, shoot, now I need to update the logo. Or if you know, do dogs and cats, but then in the future only want to do dogs, it's just, it doesn't always need to be so literal.
That's true. Yeah, you can run into a lot of issues there for sure. And I feel like we have had, like, businesses are changing all the time as, like, we learn and evolve, and a lot of people are niching down into, specific services or specific species, and then yeah, you can kind of your logo can kind of get lost in there, I guess. Yeah, that's a really interesting point and one that I didn't even think about. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I even think with my own business that I still, which honestly, it needs to be updated because I've had it for so long, but my own logo is still the same from when it was when I was an illustration business. And now I do brand and web design. But the vibe is still there and still consistent with what my goals were. So I didn't need to update the logo or change it in order to fit the new business, if that makes sense. That's not
Yeah,
always the case, but just an
yeah.
example.
Well, it's nice when, like, it's almost more like the logo seems like it's more important to be about the values and the mission
Mhm.
of your brand than it is like what exactly is it that I do because I need to portray that in my
Right.
logo. It's more just like, what's the mission? What's the values, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Do you have I know we didn't really, like, talk about this, but I'm just curious, like, do you have recommendations in general about how long a brand lasts as in terms of, like, when should you look at a rebrand?
Yeah, it totally depends on your circumstances. Sometimes people maybe made their pet business, I don't know, 15 years ago, and now you're at a point where it just starts to feel outdated. There are other examples of your services change if you did were to like literal in something, but services change, your clientele changes, your location may change because some of our branding is influenced by the type of environment that people are in. So, say you go from an outdoorsy place to a super beachy place. Okay, now your branding doesn't feel aligned with the type of clients you want to attract. So it can be a lot of factors. Totally, totally depends.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that in too, because I feel like that's where we're trending a little bit more too with our own, like, questionnaires and updating everything is, like, really focusing in on them talking about their ideal clients and from their perspective and who you're reaching out to, right? Because your logo and your brand may be awesome, but yeah, if you've moved from a, outdoorsy place to a beachy town, like, that may cause a little bit of a disconnect if you're not appealing to the people in that community, and that's really
Right.
the whole point, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so as we kind of lean into that, I wanted to address some things that can arise during branding projects to help
Mhm.
either people prepare for a successful new brand, whether they are future clients wanting to work with us or they work with someone else or they DIY. So I wanted to get into some of things like that. So first question I have for you is what common mistakes do you see when clients approach their branding visually and how can they avoid them?
Well, we've talked about this a lot as personal preferences. I feel like that comes into play all the time. That would be probably the biggest mistake that we can see. And I totally understand why it happens. We love our brand, we want to be obsessed with it, but there's a way to be obsessed with it while still attracting your target audience. So, like I mentioned earlier, if your goal is to be like a super high end and luxurious premier pet care business, you're not going to have a cartoony illustration in there, even if you think that cartoony illustrations are so cute and you love them in logos. It just isn't going to make sense for the goals of your business. Um, we talked about also being too literal or trying to fit too much in a logo. That's mainly for scalability issues, and like we said, you won't be able to really grow with it if anything were to change, but scalability is the biggest thing. It's why we get different logo variations. So if we can't even continue to minimize it, then it's just not gonna work for you. Because think of in the favicon, that tiny, tiny little image for your website URL, you're not gonna be able to see that that includes a dog, a cat, uh, all the different types of creatures that you may take care of. Um, and yeah, I think those are the 2 main ones that we see common mistakes of.
And can you explain a little bit more? I know you gave an example with the,
Yeah.
favicon. I'm curious, can you just explain a little bit more in layman's terms of what scalability, like, means?
Yeah. So your different logos, take for your primary logo, for example. So the one you're going to use the most when sizing allows for it, you want to be able to cut that down. So, for example, your primary logo, if you look at it as a shape, it may be the shape of a square. Okay. But then whenever we get onto your website, we want a logo that's more like a horizontal format to fit on like the banner header or things like the favicon. Those two different objects aren't going to be able to fit in there. So you need something that can be just a little icon, all different things. It depends on like where you really want your different logos. Stuff even like your social media icon. If you want a logo in there, sometimes we need to rework it to be able to fit in that size. So that's really what we mean by scalability. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, so if your a logo is suffering in terms of scalability, that could be issues like now we can't read the text, we can't even see what
Right.
the artwork is, like, you need to so that's why we have, different logo variations, but also we wanna be mindful of scalability even with the main logo because you don't wanna run into issues if it's barely smaller because people have different screens and that sort
Mhm.
of thing too.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and you talk about sidestepping from the scalability, but going back to your other first mistake, going back with that personal preference dilemma. I feel like that's a
Mhm.
really tough one for the pet industry because we often like, the pet industry is very personal, right? A lot of times we
For
get
sure.
into this space because of our pets. Like, we actually Pet Marketing Unleashed, the logo in there is my dog that passed away, like, right when I started the business, and, like, it's very personal. So how do we, like, find the right balance between personal preference and then what's best strategically for the business?
Yeah. So, I mean, you already gave a great example. What I was going to mention is like, I totally understand including your pet into your logo. And when it makes sense, I think it's the biggest thing. So, is that the reason you started your business like you did to honor your pet? Or is that story going to connect with your audience? For you, it really makes sense because, I mean, from an outside perspective of you see a Brandon Web studio, you'd be like, huh, there's a dog. Okay, she must do brand and websites for people in the pet industry. So that sets you apart in that way. But think about, is it also a common pet breed that you even serve? So say you have like a Chihuahua, but you mainly take care of golden retrievers and labs or something. So does including a Chihuahua really make sense? Just different things like that to make it not be so in your personal preferences with including your pet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like putting the brand first in terms of who's going to be resonating with this, and then
Right.
from there, seeing if you can incorporate some of that personal touch into it. Because again, it is a super personal industry, and I think it's so hard sometimes to, like, take a step back and figure out, like, "Okay, how do I separate myself enough?"
And
Especially if you are growing your business, right? When you talk about, like, getting started with your logo and your brand and, like, you're narrowed in on something very specific and you wanna make sure that your logo can kind of grow with you depending on if you're growing in, like, species or, whatever it is. It's super important to kind of take a step back and figure out what you want the brand to represent in terms of your values and your mission and not, um, let the personal preferences, define your brand.
right. And I think it can be easy whenever you're or like very common to whenever you're first starting out in business to go with your personal preferences. Because also a lot of times when you're first starting out in your business, you're having to put your branding together yourself or DIYing it. But then once you have been in business a little bit longer and really start to understand, okay, these are the type of people I want to work with, or this is the type of service I really want to offer. Once you know all of that stuff, you can get a better idea and put those personal preferences aside. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense because a lot of times I feel like when you're starting your business, you, like, don't really know what you're doing, like, I mean, myself
Exactly.
included,
Yeah.
like, it's not, like, a bad thing, it's just you haven't done it before, and you don't know who you like working with yet, and you don't know what works well, you don't know what profit margins make the most sense for which
Mhm.
service, like, you learn a lot, like, in that first year, I feel like, or even more or less
For
depending on the
sure.
business, but allowing yourself to kind of really figure out what you're all about and who you wanna attract could be worth it before potentially investing in, like, full branding and that sort of thing.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, because I can even think of people who they may say, "Oh, well, I do a lot of, pet sitting services for these type of people, but they're not really who I want to work with." So there could be a disconnect there with the branding. So how can we adjust it to attract those people you actually want to work for? So, whenever we ask who are those ideal clients or who are your target audience, you don't necessarily have to think who your exact clientele is right now. You can
Yeah.
be thinking, "Oh, well," and that goes into personality based too, like what type of personality do those people have?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's something too that I feel like people struggle with. And honestly, I'm curious your advice on this too. Is like when you are first getting started, is it worth it to invest in the branding versus waiting? But at the same time, like say you start with some either like basically don't have a brand at all, but then you build up a little brand recognition, and now you all of a sudden want professional branding. What if you lose that with like do you have any recommendations for that? Like, should you maybe invest in like super simple branding that can like grow with you, or like how do you like when's the right time? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I think Every single business is different, and I know that that answer is, like, probably not the one you wanna hear, but it does totally depend. A lot of times, whenever at least this was the case for me, like I mentioned with the illustration business, a lot of times your first clients are people that you already know. So, it's likely that they're not even really taking your branding into consideration. They're just like, "Oh, I know you. Yes, please watch my dog," or, "Take my dog on a walk," or things like that while I'm out of town. Um but as your brand grows and you start getting clients from, you know, different areas on social media, on your website or stuff, that is when I would say you can start investing in like legitimate branding. I never had to with my own business since I am a brand and web designer, and you may have been the same sort of case since you do web design. But yeah, I think it totally depends. It also totally depends financially. Are you in a place that you can invest in branding? That's why you've set it up in a great way of having people at different areas of their business or different stages in their business invest in what makes sense for them. So they just need the starting pieces. They can do a VIP day where they get those foundational elements to get them started at like a lower rate than those more premier branding with all the bells and whistles for those more established businesses.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's something too we were really purposeful with is like I want to be able to still help those that are just getting started or who are
Mhm.
smaller to be able to still have those foundations because I don't know if you've come across this as much yet, but like there are so many and I don't know if it's not to call out a certain like business, but I don't know if it's like 99 Designs or if it's something there's like those all sorts of companies like that where though they can like reuse the artwork. And so we've had people come in and I'm like,
And
yeah, we've seen this logo like 6 times with different colors.
yeah,
And it's
think like
like,
Canva logos.
yeah, that too. And it's like, oh man, that's like really, and it just I hate to see that because I think a lot of times people don't realize that
Mhm.
other people are using the exact same branding. And maybe it doesn't necessarily affect you because one's in San Diego and one's in New York and that sort of thing. But like there's so much overlap there that like I hate when people have to run into that sort of
Right.
situation where it's the same logo repeated so many times. And so that's kinda why, we do have something that's a little bit more foundational for them to be able to get started, especially, if they are in a place where, like, the business might change and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of opportunities for, like, rebrands too, where, like, we can keep the recognizability of the brand, but still enhance it. So there's opportunity there too.
For sure. I mean, yeah, with the logos getting repeated or the same things we're seeing over and over again. I mean, I just know in the design industry, we always just call them the Canva logos because they're just like pre-made. Just type in your business name and boom, you have a logo. But not only that, I mean, we have had cases where people really love a logo and they're like, please just make this for me. And we're like, we love that you love that, but we cannot do that from, like, a copyright perspective. And also not even I mean, take copying even out of it. Is that just because you like that logo or whatever, is that going to really attract those people and tell your brand story? Because your brand story is completely different from the logo that you really love.
Exactly, and I think that's, like you said, I guess, copyright aside, that is important, but
Yeah.
it's almost like, outside of that, it's like it's almost more important to, like, understand that, again, this is just, like, a snippet of somebody else's business that,
Mhm.
like, you can pull and this actually applies not even just, like, branding, it applies to, like, everything. It applies to your website, online marketing, like,
Absolutely.
everything, services you offer, the pricing, like, it's so different for every single business. If we just pull from different brands and, like, plug it into our online presence, it's like, that's not gonna necessarily resonate or work because, number 1, it's just pieces of other people
Right.
coming in, it's not cohesive, it doesn't make sense, like, you need to be able to tell your own story.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it really goes into everything because I mean, I've seen cases where people literally just like copy and paste different website copy and just slap it onto theirs because they're like, well, this business is so successful, so why wouldn't I want to copy that? But as cheesy as it is, the people are going to connect with you. I mean, it's the same way whenever you're like younger, you want to be like just like X, Y, and Z. And then as you get older, you realize, oh, the best thing for me to do is to just be myself and I'll attract the people that want to hang out with me or, like me for me. rather than
Yeah.
bits and pieces of someone else, you know?
Yeah, and kinda digging back to what the pet industry is so personal, like, you matter in the equation of who somebody is
Yes.
choosing to work with, so, I'd love to kinda just dig into a little bit more of, like, the collaboration since, we brought up our branding VIP days or even just our brand like, our services in general. I feel like we offer a pretty collaborative process. So do you have any advice for either our clients or anyone working with a designer or any sort of expert in their business to be able to have like, what are your tips for effective collaboration?
Yeah, I think one is really providing effective feedback whenever we do submit it. That's probably the biggest piece of collaboration, and filling out that brand questionnaire very thoroughly, because the more detailed you are in both of those sections helps us from a design perspective, because ultimately you are the expert of your business. I'm the expert in branding and web design and all those sort of things, but I don't know your pet care business like you do. So really getting detailed with all of that helps in the collaboration process.
Yeah, I think so too. I feel like a lot of times it is something like where we do get feedback and it's like, "Oh, like not this part." And you're like, "Okay, well,
Yeah.
why?" Like tell us what it is about that. Like that sort of feedback is super crucial. I also feel like honesty is a really big thing. I
Same.
think a lot of times
Yeah.
people either don't want to hurt feelings or maybe they just are unsure about something and maybe feel embarrassed about asking, like, being able to have that open communication. If you're choosing somebody to work with, whether it's us or somebody else, like, you need to feel comfortable with them and open to say what you like and what you don't like and ask the questions that you may feel silly for asking, we've had all the questions and all the questions are great.
Yeah,
And
and we're here to help. I mean, ultimately, that's literally our job, but also as our own personalities, I feel like we're both just very like helpful, want to like make everyone feel great about the process. I mean, because ultimately it's your money that you're investing. So, of course, you're going to want to walk away with something that you absolutely love. I mean, it's the same thing if I didn't speak up about like a placement of a tattoo that I have, then I would have invested in that and it would be on my body, permanently if I didn't speak up and be honest about it. So, definitely, honestly, that's a good one.
yeah, for sure. And I feel like that comes into play with too choosing the right person to work with because you need to
Mhm.
be able to feel open enough to be able to say those sort of things and know that, your voice will be heard and that sort of
Mhm.
thing because it's super important too. I feel like especially with something as important as your brand. I mean, this is literally what like the visuals that will be shown to all of your potential and current clients. Like that's super important. So to have that open dialogue is crucial.
For sure. Yeah, definitely someone you feel comfortable with. Like, and I always hope that we make everyone feel comfortable. Everyone always says like, "Oh my gosh, y'all were so much fun to like work with. Y'all kept it all like so positive and all the things." But you really are, like you said, sharing something so personal, sharing your essentially your goals in life on where you want to take this business. So yeah, trusting that designer and being able to have that open dialogue.
Yeah, for sure. So before we wrap up, one other thing that I wanted to address in terms of like the client side of things that we've seen is our issues with brand consistency when it's implemented. Like we provide, the brand and the brand guidelines and things like that. But then, maybe a month down the road, we're like, oh, like I wish they didn't like share it this way or whatever,
Yeah.
something like that. So I guess I would love to kind of give some guidance on like what it means to be brand consistent, why it's
Mhm.
important, maybe if you have any like best practices to help them be consistent effectively.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, we do provide a brand guide. So definitely follow that to a T. Don't just look over it for like 5 minutes when we submit your final files. Whenever you're making those marketing materials, stuff on social media or what have you, you can always refer back to that brand guide for like the different rules on how to make your brand consistent. And as far as being consistent everywhere, like absolutely everything you can think of on your website, on your social media, on any like printout marketing materials, in your messaging, really being consistent. Because when you are doing like, say, totally different fonts, and I know it may seem so minuscule, but when you're doing totally different fonts on your website and then, you know, different fonts over here, different colors here because you like these colors, you're not creating the whole experience together. So it's going to feel disconnected when people are scrolling on social media. They're not going to immediately recognize that that is your business because you're wanting to switch it up. Also, if you are not a designer, which it's likely that you're not if you're wanting to hire us for help, but pay attention to even how we style your brand guide or your website or social media templates. And you can mimic those sort of styling on, like, if you want to do any printout marketing materials. So look at like layouts on how we organize the text with the images, or if that feels totally overwhelming to you, you're like, no, I just do not have the design eye for that. You could definitely book us for a half VIP day and we can knock out some of those things that you want designed for you.
Yeah, perfect. I feel like that describes it perfect. I feel like a lot of times it is things like fonts, like when like somebody comes into Canva and wants to design whatever it is, like they'll put the
Mhm.
logo on there, but then like other colors, other fonts, and it just feels super disjointed and a lot of times really busy. I think that's also a big thing that we see a lot of times is like that busyness factor of like whole bunch of text. There's 3 different fonts on this and it doesn't like correlate. You want people to instantly recognize that it's your brand.
Right.
Like if they're on your social media and then they click over to your website, like it needs to feel like it's the same. So you're like, wait, where did I just land? Like we want to make sure that everything like feels consistent because also going back to, like, the purpose of your brand and, like, what it means is, like, we need to connect with those ideal people, and we've scientifically or, like, strategically designed that brand for a reason to appeal to those people, so every touch point you have the ability to market to them,
Mhm.
like, you need to be using that strategic brand to appeal to them so that they would be more likely to work with you.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to branding is way more than just a logo. So designing something and then just slapping your logo on it, suddenly you don't have a brand anymore because we
Ye
didn't, you didn't use the same colors and fonts. Or I think even whenever people are posting like, oh, holiday sale or stuff, and then they want to do like a vivid red and green, and you're like, okay, we can make something that still attracts your ideal clients by still using your brand, but also letting them know that you have a holiday sale without using the literal red and green to showcase that.
Yeah, I love how we, like, literally just came full circle. So we, like, started with
It was
brand is more than
literally
ended with it, and I love that so much. But before we actually wrap up, I did wanna, like, touch on that because that is a big one we see too is, like, we'll have, like, logos and then all of a sudden, like, they do add, like, a holiday hat or, like,
yeah.
scary background or, like, what like, do you have any advice? Like, what do they do if they want to, like I don't like, what do you say to that? Because I feel like there's so many people that do ask that. They're like, "Hey, I want a logo that I can change for, like, each, like,
Mhm.
holiday season," or, like, what's your advice or, like, response?
Yes. Well, okay. One, I feel like the good thing, and I mean, this is just the basics that, and this may sound crazy, but every single color, no matter what the shade or whatever, it's coming, from Roy G. Biv, like we learned in art class. So it's likely that you have in your brand some sort of like red tone shade or something, or some sort of green tone shade. I'm just using Christmas as an example or the holidays as an example. Or even if you don't have those colors, you may have blues to be like the wintry time. So you can lean into those colors. I mean, I think of Shady Spring, for example, where they have the greens, blues, and browns. They could make a post that's leaning more into the green tones of their brand, and so it has that sort of holiday feel without slapping red on there because they don't even have red in their branding. The same thing goes with the brand that we did, but Paws and Claws, for example, they have pinks and honestly teals in there too that they could like use those to be able to feel on brand, but still have to do with the holiday feel. Does that
Yeah.
make
Okay, so
yeah.
don't change your brand colors, don't change your logo,
No.
but on your
Find
graphic,
shades
you
that
do
feel
yes.
yeah, that
And
feel aligned to it.
oftentimes it almost, like, perfectly makes sense with your brand too, in the way that you can use those colors, if that makes sense. So, like, if you don't have a red or a green in your logo, but you do have a blue, for example, like, I feel like that could also appeal to, like, what your brand is all about and, like, what you're I guess What I'm trying to say is, like, maybe if you're doing, like, snow or, like, outdoor wintry vibes, like, that'll often still resonate with, like, your actual brand strategy versus, like, "No, I just need to do, like, a Christmas tree with, like, all the different color ornaments." Like,
Right.
by keeping it in line with your brand values, you can still have that, like, wintry vibe. Like, when you were mentioning Paws and Claws and they have a lot of different colors and they're pretty bold brands, like, I instantly thought of, like, the Target, like, they have that colorful Christmas, like, the ornaments that have all different colors, but, like, I feel like using their
Yeah,
brand colors to do that, like, that still, like, can work with, like, material for the winter. I just don't think that
for
there's, like,
sure.
necessarily, like, the pressure to, like I don't know where the pressure came that people felt like they had to update their logo to be, like, for Christmas.
I think
Um,
it goes back to the being super literal, you know?
mm, yeah,
Uh, we don't it is a lot more effective 99% of the time to not be super literal. You
yeah,
know,
and you
people
can
will understand the messaging that you're trying to get across.
yeah, and if you have a lot of colors in your, like, main logo, typically, like, we do or hopefully you're another designer, if you work with another designer, will provide different color logo options for you. So if you do want to create something using your brand colors, but maybe it's not in your main logo, like you can just use a solid color like logo, like all one color so that you can create some
Right,
sort of graphic that appeals to that. But like, we typically have like, black and white variation or like a solid color that can like work with a different season. But we don't
right,
recommend changing the colors like to your own colors in the winter or whatever
right.
season it is.
Right. Because like you're scrolling on your feed and it is going to stick out like a sore
Yeah.
thumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so holiday tangent aside, um, for our potential branding clients listening to this episode, what one piece of advice would you give them to prepare for a successful branding journey with us?
My goodness. Definitely to really get to know your ideal clients and what your goals for your business are. I think those two things are so huge to help us from like the brand design perspective to make it strategic for you and to work for you and your goals. Because if you don't know those things, then we're just like throwing darts, not knowing where it's going to hit, who it's going to connect with. So, really, really getting to know your ideal client. So, just sit there and brainstorm, like we mentioned earlier. Okay, these may be the clients that I work with, but they aren't really who I want to work with. Think about, okay, why do I not want to work with those people? Why do I want to work with this type of people? Why do I want to work with people who are more in like a like high salary job or people that are going away on trips a lot or different things, just really think about who your ideal client is. Because once you understand that, you can also, it will help you even choose what type of goals and how you're going to reach your goals in your business.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and actually, as part of our process, even before we actually, like, start the project, I actually will send them the branding questionnaire prior, just so that, like, "Hey, if you do wanna get started, like, here's the questionnaire," just so you can kinda get a sense of what questions we're gonna ask, you can get started earlier, and I feel like that also helps set the project up successfully, and I can't even tell you how many times we've had people say, like, "Wow, this brand questionnaire, like, helped me in my business," like,
Mhm.
outside of branding, because it really does get into, like, those ideal clients and, like, helps them learn more about what helps them stand out. And I feel like those sort of questionnaires or just questions to evaluate and reflect, you can even Google or ask ChatGPT for help on like, how do I figure out my ideal client? Like, just like gathering that sort of data can really help you, not even just with the branding, but elsewhere in your business.
Yeah, for sure. Cause I feel like all of us who are like entrepreneurs, petpreneurs, or whatever, we get busy and just are like, okay, I've got clients, I got projects to do, I got X, Y, and Z. And you don't sit there and just think, okay, where do I really want this business to go? What's my goal for it? Or, you know, sometimes we think, well, I just need to book clients, book clients, book clients. But you don't think, okay, but who are the people I actually want to work with? So yeah, that questionnaire is almost like having a little journal entry of about your business and saying, okay, let's get real for a second. How do I or what do I actually want to do? What are my goals and stuff? Because if you're just going on, like, say, the night before a brand VIP day that we have, you're just like, oh, well, it wouldn't be the night before, but you get like last minute
Yeah.
of thing, okay, I got to answer these questions. I got to meet the deadline. you're making an investment in your brand, so invest the time in it as well to really spend that time to answer them thoroughly.
That's true. Yeah, because 'cause we're not just asking those questions for fun to look like we're
Right.
like, look like
Not
we're
just for
comprehensive, like,
fun.
yeah, these are really, really helpful and insightful questions. Okay, we like to end every interview with a question on the topic of burnout and stress, so I'd love to know what one mindful practice or tip you have to help reduce stress or burnout in your business or life that you actually do yourself.
Yeah, I always love a little self-care and taking time for myself. So for me, this is having a slow morning. And luckily I'm in a case where I am like a freelancer and stuff, so I can create my own schedule. I don't have to start at a specific time, but waking up earlier to go to the gym and then coming home, having breakfast and really sitting down. I love to watch a little YouTube video or I could be listening to a podcast, but really taking those, like honestly, it's like 2 to 3 hours of just, like, time to myself before I sit in front of the computer really helps me with the burnout and stress. If it's too bad, sometimes I do meditate or hot yoga is a lot of fun to really de-stress. So, yeah, honestly, just taking time for myself is my biggest one.
Yeah,
What
I
about you?
love Go ahead.
I said, "What about you? What do you do?"
It's funny, it's actually kind of similar. I feel like I actually try and get up before everyone else does so I can go take a walk with my dog. I feel like
Yeah,
that, like, I'm like, I focus on, like, breathing, I don't bring my phone, I don't listen to anything, like, I just, like, go for a walk like, before everyone else is up so I can have, like, my own time before like, if my kid's waking me up on the monitor and then the dog needs to it's like, no,
right.
my time first, I feel like is super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I think all the time how grateful I am for the jobs that I have because if I was like a corporate baddie, it would not be the life for me. Having to like wake up, no time to work out, or I would have to work out at like 5 a.m., something crazy.
Mhm.
It just, yeah, I don't think I could do it.
Yeah, the beauty of
Props to those who
entrepreneurship.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cagney. If you, listener, would love to work with Cagney, head on over to our website at petmarketingunleashed.com. You can reach out to us about branding and website designs projects with Cagney because she also does beautiful websites as well, and we can connect you with her. But thank you so much, Cagney, for taking some time to talk branding with us.
Yeah, this was so much fun, and I can't wait to work with whoever inquires. We're gonna have a great time.
Yep. Perfect. Stopping the record. Awesome. You're the best.